the freeway, slanging my, banging my, swinging my coupe. DeVille, scoop, DeVille, like that.
Welcome to Neutral Voices in Depth, and we have been talking about education this month, and we're going to finish out our conversation on education. I think we got another week, but this week we're going to be talking about the educational system as a whole, in comparative not only to states, different states, but in different countries, how American educational system works. Now, as we're going to talk about this, we have come from, I know Fort Wayne Community Schools is probably the second largest school system in Indiana, I do believe. Mm-hmm. And I'm a product of Fort Wayne Community Schools. But Jill, you didn't come from Fort Wayne Community Schools. You went to a smaller school system?
I did.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Lakeland High School, and I went to Wolcott Mills Elementary.
Yeah. And what county or what school system would that be?
So both of those were in LaGrange.
Okay.
LaGrange County. And as far as our school systems, we didn't have it like it was here because you didn't have a choice. The nearest school is usually another 30 or 40 minutes away.
Okay.
So, yeah, very small system, very small schools.
Okay. Now, and you can chime in, Fort Wayne Community Schools, I would believe we had a quality education. It could be better, compared to systems, but, and we didn't know, and I'm going to be honest, we didn't know the lack of the school system or the deficiency of school systems until we got out of it because we were all already into it. So
product of it, yeah.
Yeah, so and we were being groomed into it. But at the time, you would think that it's an adequate school system and it's giving you the quality education. Coming from a smaller school system, what was the focus and how was the classrooms and how did you see it being a part of that?
So one of the things, and actually when I was doing my research on some of these other schools, and the states and such, it made me think back to my school. And, the first thing you asked is differences, if I noticed any differences. The one thing I will say that I feel I took out as a positive was since the school was small, the classrooms were smaller. The sizes, of the classroom. So we all had individual, from, first grade to high school, I never remember there being so many kids in the classroom where you couldn't get the teacher's attention. The principal and superintendent were very involved in our school. They talked to us it was very small and close knit. On the other side of that, it was an all-white school. There was no diversity, so I didn't grow up, and not just the school, the town, the county, I feel like I was kind of sheltered as far as being in a small town in an all-white school. Right. A lot of that I've learned, I had to learn, when I got older. So positives and negatives.
Yeah. Well, in overall, the educational system in the United States, it works for what it does. It works for what it's designed for. But in comparative to different things, you'll see very stark differences, and we're going to get into that. But first of all, we're just going to talk about, because we talked about recently the difference between public and private schools and charter schools and even homeschool. But if we're even going to look at public schools, because Ian and I was talking about before we came on the air, we're going to look at the difference between urban schools and suburban schools, because these are two state public school systems that have stark contrast. And we're going to get into it with you, Jill, because you were talking about the funding, but we're just going to talk about the concept of that and the funding, because the funding is one of the biggest things there is.
Well, when you got a low property tax in your community, and that's what supposedly funds the schools. So if your property taxes, if there's no ownership and there's no money flowing into the school system. So, being that Fort Wayne has a lot of schools, and where they're located at, some of them are located at, and what's fund these schools, we got 3 big high schools, real big high schools in Fort Wayne, Northrop, Wayne, and Snyder. No,
Southside and Snyder.
Yeah, Southside and Snyder. And these are schools that's so big where I think Southside is still in top 10 as one of the top 10 diverse schools in America. and the funding for it is not equivalent, yeah, to what it needs.
Yeah, and I'm agree with that. And you mentioned the property taxes, and Jill, we're going to let you get in on this, but I don't know if everybody remembers. I think it may have been just about 10 years ago, the Indiana State House passed a ordinance, a bill, or whatever it was that capped property taxes. And when that happened, that put a grips on the educational because it cut a lot of the budget and things like that. Yeah. But the problem was it only hurt the inner city schools more than it did the suburban schools, because in most suburban schools, when you look at it, they're in areas where they have a high market value on homes, they have a greater income. So if they have the higher market value on home and greater incomes and a bigger the land, the property, whatever, the property tax base is bigger. Yeah. Now, as E alluded to, in the inner city, most of the houses are, you do have some ownership, but you find a lot of rental properties and things like that. And with the rental properties and the taxes is, you got to understand those are businesses, and people write a lot of that off. So that cuts down the property tax base that would go to the city. So where it is funded equally for what it's put in, but is it funded correctly for the whole thing? But this is what I say. So if you put this amount in, they're going to put that amount into that school system, where this school system is putting a lot more tax base. So that school system, and you can see it. Look how big in Homestead, Carolyn. Even think of some of the technologies and things that they have that the inner city schools don't have. It's because they have a bigger tax base, so the more they have a bigger share. So is it funded equally? I don't believe it is.
No, I mean, you can look at it. Son goes to Homestead. Their school is a middle school and a high school basically in one.
Right.
And, one side of the building is a middle school, another side. I mean, you can literally walk from one school to the other by staying inside. Now, if you look at schools in the inner city, these schools are so spread out apart where it would be nice to have a Miami and a Wayne dead smack together. You know what I'm saying?
So you're saying consolidate schools.
Consolidate a school.
And that's a interesting point. I've never seen it that way.
So I mean, if you do things like that, instead of having Miami on this property and Wayne a half a mile down the street versus,
it's not too far.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You got Lakeside and Northside could be boom right there. And then if you look at some of the spots where these schools are at, they are actually like Southside is in dead heart of the city. There's no room for it to grow. Right. You know what I'm saying? Northside, there's no room for it to grow.
Right. Most schools are like that for Fort Wayne Community School. Because what is it? Is it Glenwood, Snyder, then Lakeside? Not Lakeside.
No, it's Lane.
Lane. Yeah.
So I mean, just imagine having all that on one property.
Yeah.
So that cuts down on bills.
That's very wow. I never pictured it or thought about that.
Then you have more counselors in the building.
Right. And that's less funding that you're running two buildings instead of three because the elementary.
Yeah. So you put these together to make it one entity. So there's no okay. Do I decide to go to this school because I want to? No. You feed right into it, and just leave it like that and make it make sense. But a lot of things, common sense ain't that common around here when it comes to education. And here's a fun fact. Indiana is ranked 11th in public schools in the nation.
11th?
11th.
Wow.
This is as of 2023.
Wow.
Indiana is the 4th lowest dropout rate.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Now that's a stat that I didn't think of or wouldn't have thought of. That's amazing.
So I mean, we can make it better if we did consolidate schools and made it make more sense. That way, you can't say there's not enough teachers, there's not enough counselors, there's not enough this, that, and the other. Now the other
teachers can be paid because the overhead is less.
Yes, yeah, or less overhead. I read an article. I was trying to pull it up. I want to say in Baltimore, there are more cops in their schools system than it is counselors.
Because between Baltimore and Newark, New Jersey, those are probably the two lowest. Because Baltimore school system is terrible. I remember, what was it, 3 years ago that they in the inner city school, it was less than 1% that passed the basic math math and reading skills.
Well, you asked too if, or you had said that you don't believe that the funding is equal, although they say it is. Well, I beg to differ. I don't believe. I think that the wealth disparities carry over into the education system.
It is true.
And the reason I say that is, for one, there's a lot of flaws in the system. And just to give you an idea before I go into that, statistically, most districts that are predominantly white are typically smaller, yet receive quite a bit more funding. In fact, last year, predominantly white schools received more than $23 billion than Black, Latino, and other minorities.
You know
so
why?
it's quite a difference. And yes, go ahead.
You know why, right?
Go what
It's not because of where they at.
right.
It's all because of their test scores.
It has nothing to do
It has
with
nothing to do with where the school is at. It's the test scores. Now, to me, that's backwards. If I see that a school
It's struggling.
is struggling and they need
More
than another school, I'm not going to give the school just because. I mean, there's nothing wrong with rewarding that school.
Excellence. I get you.
I mean, it's perfect. But if you see this school over here is struggling in certain areas, okay, we need to put more money in these areas where these schools are struggling in versus giving another school $5 billion and only give them $1 million.
And that brings me to my next thing. So say it. The rest of it.
Massachusetts.
I can't say that one.
Massachusetts?
Yeah,
You really can't say Massachusetts?
No, not really fast. So
That's talks about her school system. Let's go with that. Go ahead.
So
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. They are number one and almost have always been throughout the decades. So they were speaking to one of the board of directors at a meeting, and they asked him how when their Massachusetts isn't really much different than any other place in the area, especially surrounding areas. And do you know what he said? He said the problem is not always funding, it's where the funding is distributed, just
Correct.
like you said, and how the funding is spent. So I wanted to correlate that with the amount of funding. So their funding is extremely high. He talked about them demanding funding. There were a lot of impoverished areas. And like E said, when you have people, area that is in poverty or close to the poverty line, whatever the race, if it is below the poverty line, it costs more per student. So they break it down, and I found something that was called a per pupil funding number. So this is if you break down on average how many students versus the demographics, and it'll come back with a report that says, okay, in Michigan, the funding will cover $9 a year for him. It will cover $2. So it's per student in your schools. If all of us were equal and all of our children were equal, why would that per pupil cost be so astronomically different?
Yeah.
So there is nothing equal about the funding system. There are more inequalities in this system than anything else. It just carries over from everything else.
Right. And as both of you said, and E said the right thing, said something that sparked interest in this truth. The test scores, and it's hard to, I'm not going to say they're not accurate, but it's hard to believe that every year you're going to have a school system fail. Every year you have a school system that fail. There's a lot of things that have to go into that, that you would have to look at, that they're taking funding away. And why would you close a school that is failing instead of, like you say, enriching that school? Because when you close that school, that puts a more burden in that community. And
on a whole nother school.
Yes. So, but the funding is not being distributed correctly because, it just is not. And as you were saying about the per pupil, think about it. Because if it was equal, you have 200,000 kids in this school district, and they have a low per pupil, and so they don't get it. But they say, okay, because of the numbers, you still get equal, but that still does not equal the students
Right.
where you get this.
Well, I mean, if you do it equally, only way you can do it equally is for every, say, okay,
A seventh grader that
No.
goes to Southside gets the same amount that goes to Carroll.
yeah.
That's
So
equal.
if I get $20,
They get $20.
you get $20. So I mean, let's just keep it honestly fair across the board. But if they do that now, this Southside student is getting the same education as this other Carroll or whatever student.
Right.
Hold on, now that's not fair. Now that's too much like even in the playing field.
That's true.
So if we're gonna even the playing field, no, we can't do that because now that means that school on that south side of town is finna rise up, and guess what? That's a lot of minorities in one school.
Right.
They're right.
So we can't have the. I mean, it's just it is what it is. I'm gonna be quite honest. Take it how you want it. Just enjoy your night on it. But now I could keep a certain class or a certain race of people at a minimum.
Yeah.
That's true.
And you said it again. And when I think about like what I noticed when I was doing the research and seeing the numbers, I think of this the same way I think of the community that is underfunded, the community that you see the damage, you see what becomes detrimental when funding is not coming into a community. It is no different from our schools. You know, the kids are not going to flourish. You can walk into a school, even in our area, and immediately tell the difference in funding from one school to the next.
True.
And the numbers will show that. So those in power who say they care about our children, some of them wouldn't be living like that at the safe school that is supposed to be a safe haven, while others are living like this.
I'm sitting there reading this chart, and it is funny because we hear a lot about the Maryland schools and the New Jersey schools, right? Peep gang, New Jersey ranks number 3 in the country as one of the best school systems. The quality of their education is ranked number 2. The safety of the school is ranked 19th. Okay, we're gonna break down to Maryland. Maryland is number 8th, and they got their test scores 73. Hold on. New Jersey 65.4 of their passes the test. I mean, it's a high quality, and you look at schools places that you would think that would be safe. Like Montana. Montana is 19. Their safety is 26.
What's in Montana, though?
I mean, Minnesota is 36. Hold on, here's the funniest one I looked at. Nevada. Nevada is 44. They safety of their schools is at a 50. That's the worst.
Yeah, that's and it is sad that and that's why I said sometimes you got to think about the numbers and the test scores and who's grading them. But here's the thing, and you mentioned this about, and we were talking about the funding. I don't know who the current Secretary of Education is. Please forgive me because I didn't look up his name, but I remember the former Betsy DeVos. And I think I'm saying her name right. I remember several years ago she had this hearing, and her main issue was to stop governmental funding for public schools or education, period. And that is a detriment or a thought that I don't think anybody, especially the leader of education, why would you have that thought? Because if you take away the government funding, as least as it is and as unfair as it is, if you take that away,
she out of a job.
Not only that, but who's the education for? That means there's going to be a whole population of people. It's going to be where education is only deemed for those that can afford it.
Exactly. Instead of equal education for everyone.
Yeah. And I bring that up because, as you say, we were researching and looking over things, and there was not only urban and suburban. I looked at and we looked up some things that were global. Now, America, the problem with America's education system, and nobody really talks about it or really wants to recognize it, is that America the American education system has a corporate entity to it. There's a price to education. Even our free education has a price to it. And we were talking about this before we came on air. There's book fees. And I don't know if y'all remember book fees, you know. And I remember at the time they were telling people if you didn't pay your book fees, you couldn't graduate. You couldn't do so book fees. But you paid a book fee or a fee for a book. And Eric made a point. It was a book rental fee. But every year you paid the market price of that book that you rented. So if you're paying market price for the book and you got to get that book back, you know, where's that money going?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Lunch, and I do believe Fort Wayne Community Schools now have opened up free lunch for all their students. I believe, I'm not sure, but I think the lunches are free. But think about it. You make it that kids have to go to school and parents have to get their kids to school. They're there 5 to 7 hours a day, but you make them buy a lunch. You have them there, but you make them buy a lunch.
Right.
And then, you know, there was always a free lunch program, but then there was some that didn't make the free lunch, but still wasn't able enough to afford lunch.
Exactly.
So, you know, they're in a predicament. So it just was corporate all the way around. So you are getting funds from the people that you're supposed to be funding.
Right.
I mean, it just didn't make sense. But I looked at China and China's school system. China, Norway, and I think it was Australia that I looked up, but it was China and Norway were the main two. China's school system is one that you start school at about 4. You're not out of school until you're about 17, between the ages of 16 and 18. Their dropout rate is near 0 because they don't believe in dropouts. So they go through their system. Their school lunches are free. Their books are free. All the education necessities are free. I know China is a communist country, so you got to think, but you just got to think of how it's worked. So everything is free. But then when they get out of the age between 16 and 18 that they can get out of school, you're either going to a university, you're going to the military, or you're going to the job force. But you're not going to the job force where you're just going to work. They actually put you in a force where they train you and you get trades and you work specific jobs. Norway is a lot freer, where everything is free. The school lunches are free. The quality of their lunches is free. And it's just different. And they have a very low dropout rate too. And again, that's not a communist country, but it's, you know, and they don't have taxes. So everything is funded through the government. And their educational system is one of the top in the world as well. So without that corporate entity, the education system will function as it should, and it will produce as it should. Everybody would be equal, and everybody will receive the quality of education, the equalness of education, and everything. But when there's a corporate entity, it's not for the ones that are in it; it's for the ones that's on the outside of it.
Right. I have another geography thing for you.
Okay.
Oh, geography.
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
Yeah, where's that at?
That's in Germany, correct?
So Luxembourg is it in Germany?
Yes.
It's in Germany. I didn't know where it was. I didn't have time to look. So,
Hey, I didn't know where it was neither.
so there you go. If it's not in Germany, let us know, because then
We got Wikipedia over here.
yeah, he's wrong. Google's canceled. So I said that because Luxembourg, their per pupil amount. Now, keep in mind, this is not how much is spent on a student throughout the year or given to them for funding. This is how much is allotted with the funding. So this Luxembourg, $24,000 per pupil. The average in the U.S. is at the high mark $14,000. So Luxembourg is almost double that. They have a literacy rate of 100%. 100%. Like, that to me was absolutely crazy. They rank 4th in the entire world. Their funding is all the way at the top. They are one of the top funded, so much that they are 100% funded.
Right.
So the correlation between the amount of funding and the literacy rate and this and that, how can you say that? You know, there's no correlation.
And then again, you got to look at it. Again, we do have government funding to work, but An American government is a corporation. So
Hold on, let me break
go ahead.
something down. Break something down real quick, and let's make this make sense. This is how much the American government really care about our education system.
Mm-hmm.
They give $800 billion to the military.
$800 billion per year.
Yeah, hold on.
I just want to make that per year.
Yeah, that's 10 times more that they feed into our education.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make it make sense. So you care about military versus educating students.
Educating the people you're probably putting in the military.
Yeah.
at a
So I
later
mean,
date.
it doesn't make sense. If you got to put that much money into the military services, that let me know that you're doing something so wrong where you'd rather stay armed than educated.
Well, and think about that too. Let's look at the educational system in the United States, and it's corporate. And I'm gonna tell you, it's corporate. And here's the ugly side of the corporation: they are piping out people for the other part of their corporation. Why is it that we'll close a school and we'll open a prison? And the prison, opening up prisons and building up prisons is equivalent to the educational rate or dropout rate for that state or that community. That's how they know how many prisons to build. They predict that by the educational level and the dropout rate of that particular state, county, or whatever. So, if you are not educating, what are you doing?
Right.
You're
Right.
preparing them for another institution.
Yeah, you're preparing them for another institution. I mean,
And if all of them are falling short, coincidentally, all of them are falling
Not all of
short.
them.
There is no way that that is an absolute.
Yeah,
Well, I
because
mean-
they're not building. They're not building. I mean, you know,
they're not building schools at all for the community. You have to literally have somebody like LeBron James to build a school to try to make his community halfway decent.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, and then this is where we are, and it has to come to a point. And you say this a lot. It has to come to a point where our community has to, first of all, become a community again. We have to, first of all, develop who we are, what we are, where we are, and do that. We have to understand our value, and we understand that. Now, I do agree. We need to start our own schools. It can start as a homeschool system and then build out into a public school system, or there has to be some kind of connection because we can only control what we want to control, and the funding is not going to change for school system.
No.
It's really
No, it's
not.
not.
It's really not. It's going to be the same thing,
It's who you put in. And I'm gonna be quite honest, it's who you put in that office.
right?
Yeah.
Because you got that guy down in Florida
DeSantis,
don't want no blacks to have an education
no.
at all. I mean, nothing to do with an education. He would rather for y'all blacks to be out on the streets than kill themselves.
Yeah, or to not be there. Period.
Yeah.
He doesn't want him. He doesn't.
He doesn't want any minority in that state at this point.
Yeah.
So if you got people in office like that, inner city community schools would never thrive
Right.
because he's gonna take everything he could take out of that school to suffocate it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to start first by honestly understanding who we putting in office in our
Preach.
states.
Yeah.
Preach.
Understanding who we put in office in our city.
Yes.
Understanding who we put on the school board.
Right.
Understanding who we put as a superintendent.
Yeah.
We fail to realize that they actually work for us.
Right.
So, and I'm guilty of it not going to school board meetings.
I think we all. Yeah.
I mean,
think
we all are.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to a point where we need to make a stand, we need to, from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. Hey, if we don't feel that our children are getting the right education, or you leading our kids in the right way, we need to be down there raising all kinds of habits.
Mm-hmm.
I got you.
Amen.
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 Amen. Amen. Man.
That's it.
That's it. She got E spit.
That's all.
She dropped the mic on E. Oh my goodness! But no, these are very profound things, and we got to figure out a way. We got to figure out a way to help and change our educational system because I can't believe every inner city school in every city is failing. I
Right.
can't believe that.
Right.
That's impossible.
I mean, like I said, we looked at the numbers.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, and we talking about some of the places in America that's supposed to be the worst places,
Yeah.
like New Jersey, and they number 3 in education. And come on, now, listen, something ain't right.
Something ain't
Yeah.
right.
Your number reflects how much the people in power care about your schools, because that number has nothing to do with those children.
And he said
Absolutely
it all.
nothing.
We just got to change the power structure. We got
Yeah.
to change who we empower. But we want to thank you all for joining us in our conversation. And we will be back tomorrow, but we will be back tomorrow with Respect the Game. And we're going to continue our conversation about the GOAT, the greatest
MJ.
of all time
we
playing
gonna
basketball.
continue talking about MJ.
No, MJ doesn't even in the conversation.
Yes,
we know
he
who he
is.
is. We know who he is.
Come on,
MJ
bro.
is not the conversation that
He
we
is.
having.
He
I already told you who it's going to be. Hey, and if you're out there, chime in. Tell us who you think your go to basketball. And again, what we're doing is we're not doing it by thoughts or opinions. We got a skill that we're breaking down, and we're going to go through that.
That skill is culturally biased. That skill is like the SAT. It's culturally biased.
All right. But we got to ask you to join us. We thank you for joining us tonight. Going to ask you to join us tomorrow as we having fun and heated debate. But before we leave our people, what do we always say to our people?
Always protect your why.
All right. Have a good one.
High speed chase, 405 is the freeway. Slanging my, banging my, swinging my coupe. DeVille, scoop.